relationships with children that have medical issues, the parental relationships are more difficult. It's not inherent, but what's inherent is distraction.
Hello, welcome to The Rare Life. I'm your host, Madeline Cheney. Today, I am so excited to share a conversation I had with Dr. Matt Townsend for episode 43, as he teaches us about being emotionally safe within our marriages and partnerships. This is such a crucial topic within season 3's theme of our relationships being impacted by our children. As a quick disclaimer, in this episode, when we refer to marriage and husbands and wives, this obviously includes all kinds of partnered relationships. All are included. So when we found out that Kimball had medical issues when I was pregnant with him, one of the things that came to mind was the statistic that I had heard. I don't even know where I heard it, but that special needs parents are more likely to be divorced because of the extra strain on their marriages. And so that was something I kind of logged away in my mind. Like, along with all these other huge life adjustments, my marriage is on the line. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who has heard that. And I facilitate a support group for special needs moms through the organization We Are Brave Together. And I had a friend say, "Why are you guys talking about marriage?" And so I was like, oh, well, statistically, we're more likely to have marriage issues because of our children. So in preparation for this episode, I did a little research and I found out that that is actually kind of just a rumor. And there's even another study that proved it wrong. So I find this super interesting that even though that was just a rumor of a statistic, it still affected me and it affected my marriage. And I'm sure it's affected other people as well. And maybe it has affected you. But I'm here to tell you that's not a thing. We're not statistically more likely to get divorced. But that being said, there is more strain on us. There's more asked of us. And so it's a really important topic to talk about how we can keep our marriages strong, because when it comes down to it, a healthy marriage can be a huge resource while we're navigating all these really hard things. So in my conversation with Matt, it was interesting because I was kind of hoping for a silver bullet or some crazy cool way for us, specifically in our special needs marriages, to be closer. But Matt kept directing it back to the basics. It all goes back to the basics. We just might need the basics more than the average Joe, though everyone has something hard they're going through. So that was a really interesting takeaway that I had from this episode. We don't need anything special. We need the basics. Dr. Matt Townsend is a big shot. He's a big deal. As it eloquently states in his biography in the back of his book on marriage, Starved Stuff, Feeding the 7 Basic Needs of Healthy Relationships, it says, he has experience with speaking and training hundreds of Fortune 500 companies, including CNN, Lockheed Martin, IBM, Nike, and the U.S. Navy. The Matt Townsend Show has thousands of radio listeners tuning in each week in the Intermountain West. So what gave me the audacity, you might ask, to invite him on the show? Well, we have the privilege of going to parent conferences every winter for parents of children that have deaf blindness. And the one from last year is when I met Carrie and Aaron from episodes 10 and 11. They're awesome conferences. And this year, because of COVID, we had ours virtually on Zoom, which of course sounded super boring and not nearly as cool as our in-person ones where they put us up in a hotel and fed us awesome food and we had speakers and it was awesome. So I was expecting kind of a dry, boring evening, but I tuned in because I love the companionship of other parents. And Matt Townsend was our speaker. Well, I'd heard his name before. It sounded familiar, but I didn't really put it together. And he taught us about self-care and marriage. And he was hilarious Justin and I were just laughing the whole evening, and he was super uplifting. And I felt so ready to face life again after his presentation. And I was like, oh, that would be so cool to have him on the podcast. He could do our episode about marriage because I knew I wanted to have an episode about that. So afterwards, I found out how big of a deal he is. And I was like, oh, well, I'll still ask him. Like, who knows? Nothing to lose. So I did. And he said yes, which made me love him that much more because he's just so personable and down to earth. So obviously, I'm very excited to share this one with you. His bio summed it up by saying, Matt has the perfect mix of cutting edge research in communication and human relationships combined with the skill of a top notch humorist. This blend ensures that audiences are entertained as well as enlightened and leave with practical information that can be immediately applied to their life. That sums it up so well. So as I was reading through his book, I picked out a topic and I asked him to delve into it, and that is emotional safety, which is being able to share what's in your heart. Because as I was reflecting on my relationship with Justin and the way that it has actually been strengthened through all of the adversity we've been through with Kimball, I realized that emotional safety is what made the difference. Being able to open up and share our deepest, darkest feelings with each other and feel safe in that. And so today he's going to teach us about that, about being emotionally safe and how to improve that safety if it needs improvement, which includes some awesome insights on communication. This is one of those episodes with tons of practical takeaways that you could apply today. So I suggest taking one or maybe two things he teaches and working on that instead of getting super overwhelmed, because that could be easy to do. I will put a link in the show notes for his awesome book because this is the tip of the iceberg and there's so much more he has to teach us. The book is also really fun and easy to read because he is so funny and he has awesome voice in it. Matt is a lover of homemade macaroni and cheese and tennis. Let's dive in. Hi, Matt. Thank you so much for joining us today.
You bet. Good to be here, Madeline. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I was reading through your book. I was looking through the 7 basic needs critical to all healthy and enduring relationships.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. And I was thinking, which principle could we talk about today that would really make a big difference, could make or break a marriage, with all this in consideration? And the one that really struck me was emotional safety. I feel like as you're going through grief together and as you are going through these really hard things, feeling emotionally safe could be the biggest game changer. So I would like to start out. What do you think of that? And what can you teach us about emotional safety?
Yeah. So one of the things that there's so much we can go with right here. One of the things that I teach is every relationship has 7 needs. Okay. And one of the needs you brought up is safety. And what I teach is when the needs are met, you feel healthy, you feel loved, you feel great. When the needs aren't met, the 7 needs spell an acronym called STARVE. So when we don't have the needs met, we start to starve. And so one of the needs is safety. That's the S in starved. And what I teach is you got to feel physically safe so no one's going to be harmed, socially safe so we're not going to be embarrassed by each other, emotionally safe so I can share what's in my heart, financially safe so we have enough money, spiritually safe so we have the same values. Every human has the same needs. But one of the most basic of the safety needs is that I need to know that emotionally I can share what's in my heart with my partner and that they'll be able to receive it. Now, think of this though. Who teaches you how to be emotionally safe? Who was born knowing how to just validate? We know we want to. I think the desire is inherent, but the ability, I don't know that we all know how to do that. And then another problem with emotional safety is it may not be your partner that breaks your safety. It may be that they came to the marriage with a little bit of a broken emotional safety. So there is a thing going on today that is pretty common called attachment issues. and this you'll see playing out in just raising a child with medical conditions and medical issues, is every human being needs those safety, trust. We have to feel appreciated. We have to feel respected. We have to feel validated. We have to feel encouraged. We have to feel dedication. When the needs aren't met and we're really young, then we start to attach to people differently.
Hmm.
We almost attach in one of two ways. We become either really needy in being attached. And so we're always checking and we become very controlling and we're trying to control that we're going to get loved.
Hmm.
Or a lot of us don't control love. We detach from it whenever the needs aren't met. And they call that
Oh,
an attachment issue. So if that happened when you were really young, it might be now you all of a sudden have a child that needs medical issues. And now you're starting to feel vulnerable because what if this child dies?
yeah.
And you don't know what to do with that. So if you have an attachment issue, which they believe is about 60% of our population,
Wow.
then you tend to go back to that immature way of being attached. Let me give you an example. I had a guy come to me that he couldn't connect to his family. Christmas holiday, he would kind of disappear for a while, or he'd be in his office. But he grew a really incredible company, like worth $100 million. He was very
Oh, wow.
successful, but he couldn't connect to his kids. He couldn't connect to his wife. And I had him in my office, and I was talking to him, and I'm like, "What's going on when you go to your office? Why do you disconnect from your family?" And he told me that it's because they don't need me.
Hmm.
They're fine without me. I try to step in and I kind of do everything wrong, and I never feel like I'm adequate enough. I never feel like I belong.
Hmm.
They just kind of have moved on without me. They don't need me. And I'm not good enough at what they need me to do. I'm not good at working with my kids. I'm not good at being patient. So I've just learned to just go to my office. And I asked him, what was the first time you ever felt that way, that you weren't needed, that you didn't belong, that you didn't matter like that? And
Hmm.
he just stopped for a second and his eyes teared up. And he said, I think it was when I was 15 and I didn't make a baseball team. I'd always made the baseball team with all my friends. And at
Hmm.
sophomore year, I didn't make the sophomore baseball team. And it was the first time in my life I didn't belong.
Hmm.
And it was the first time in my life they didn't need me. And I go, what did you do? And he said, I just detached. Right then, he learned a fight or flight method
Yeah.
to get away from that pain. And we think that that was just one event back then. But what
Hmm.
happened is he actually turned it into a script. And anytime he felt vulnerable from pretty much then on, he would just detach.
Hmm.
So, what might be happening when we have emotional safety issues? I learned it when my parents divorced when I was young. The people you
Right.
love could leave you.
Right.
So if I had a child with medical issues and he was in NICU and I'm hoping he's going to survive, then
Hmm.
that makes me emotionally vulnerable. And instead of acting like an adult male, I may either try to control everything or I may detach, just like I did when I was an 8 or 9 year old boy when my parents divorced. So
Totally.
sometimes what we're doing is we're not just battling the issue with our child, we're
Hmm.
battling the emotion, and the emotion is tied way back in our development to other situations, to other experiences. And a lot of us just never learned a healthy way to be emotionally safe. Or a lot
Yeah.
of us were raised in situations where we weren't ever emotionally safe. Like, and it
Yeah.
doesn't even mean you have bad parents. It doesn't mean anything like that. So
Right.
one of the keys to emotional safety is don't fret it, just learn from it. All emotions are communicating something.
Hmm.
So just let the emotion tell you what it's teaching you. It's always teaching us something. And emotions are usually there to get us to make sure that we don't get hurt and that we take advantage of good things. So
Okay. Yeah.
emotions are usually they're a pretty good tool. And usually if you're afraid of being hurt, you might pull away more. And if you want to
Yeah.
take advantage, you might get more aggressive. And so think
Hmm.
about it. Every single mother that is listening to this right now, some of you may have just immediately froze when you got the news about your child and you didn't know
Right.
what to do. Some of you didn't freeze, but some of you detached.
Yeah.
And that sometimes a lot of men detach, they withdraw because they don't know what to do. And a
Yeah.
lot of it might not even be what to do with the child. It might be what to do with their spouse's emotion.
Yeah.
So,
Because
you know
it
what I
can be
mean?
scary.
That means a lot of men in conversations. That's why we're more likely to withdraw from the talk. We don't want to
Mm.
have this conversation because
Yeah.
it's too emotional and we don't know what to do with your tears.
So what do we do? Like, okay, so say I'm opening up to my husband and he feels super uncomfortable and it's
Yes.
hard for him to watch me in pain.
Yeah.
And so he's like, I don't want to talk about it. What would be a good approach to that?
So it's, by the way, super important. Notice that he's already telling you he
Hmm.
doesn't want to talk about it. So what you might do is you might try to get out of you and get into that. So I
Hmm.
can see it makes you uncomfortable. Would you be willing to just be emotionally vulnerable enough with me right now to let me know why it makes you so uncomfortable? What is it? And if you actually listen to what he's saying, he'll give you stuff. He'll give you great answers. A lot of times you won't like the answers because
Yeah.
he might say something like, I just feel like the minute we get into these topics, you go crazy.
Yeah.
Like, so let's say he just says some line like that.
Hmm.
But instead of reacting to his line, try to understand what is the need that's not being met. I call it smoke and fire. Okay. So
Right.
every human being, when we talk, we can either talk in the smoke, which is kind of the irritating stuff we end up bringing up that's not the real issue, or we can get
Hmm.
down to the fire. And the fire is always going to be one of those 7 needs. You're always going to have a
Hmm.
safety, a trust, an appreciation, respect, validation, encouragement, or dedication. So if he brings up something like, I don't know, I just feel like you go crazy and you just get all mad at me every time we talk about these things. So
Hmm.
I don't want to go there. And then self-fulfilling exactly what he's saying.
Yeah.
Instead, just listen and try to see if what he's saying is that a safety issue? Because it sounds like
Hmm.
safety to me. He doesn't feel
Oh.
safe to have this conversation. And then you just reflect it. So it sounds like when we get into these emotional issues, you see me kind of go crazy, get emotional, get mad or whatever, and it scares you and you don't know what to do with it. So you don't feel safe.
Yeah.
And that's you getting down to the fire. And usually he'll validate it. Well, yeah. Now he may not like your word. I mean, I feel, I mean, I'm not insecure. I can handle it. It's just, but it's just, yeah, I think it's just not safe to talk about certain things.
Yeah.
And then I just keep reflecting. So you feel like these issues they're just not safe to ever talk about. And he would say, well, yeah, yeah. Now in your head, you're like, we have to talk about it, you
Yeah.
dummy. We have
Yeah.
to.
Yeah.
But so then you could even paraphrase it. So you feel like there are certain topics in our marriage we should never, ever, ever discuss. Is that what you're saying? And usually when you hold it up for him to see what he's saying,
Yeah.
he'll correct. Well, I mean, we need to probably talk about some of them.
Hmm.
They're just not safe. Then you just hold it up. So you acknowledge that there are topics we have to talk about. And yet
Hmm.
we still don't know how to do so safely. Is that what you're saying?
Right.
And he'd say, yeah. And you'll notice when you let him talk and you're not reacting and you're not controlling the conversation, but instead you're just responding to it, then
Uh-huh.
all of a sudden you start to understand each other. So I call that real understanding. Real understanding is when we get out of the smoke and we
Hmm.
just get a little deeper to where they're starving. And once you
Yeah.
kind of unhook the starved issue, you'll see the conversation can move on more.
Yeah, and that sounds like it's a really respectful way
Yeah.
to go about it because
Yeah.
you're validating I'm bringing
Yeah.
up all the
That's
different
it.
principles. You're
Validation
validating
101.
their
Yeah.
feelings. And I like how it's like objective. So
Yeah.
you're saying, "Look, I can hold the emotions in and can be objective for a minute and kind of get through
Yeah.
this first
That's
before we
right.
get into the like
And
big scary dark stuff."
that's where you'll see the catharsis of
Mhm.
a good conversation is because if you can make the space safe enough to have the conversation by not reacting to everything I say, inside their story, you'll hear where they're starving every time.
Mm.
People tell you where they're starving. They just don't say it that I'm starving. They
Mhm.
infer it, right? It's always kind
Yeah.
of there sitting there in the data that they give you. So pick it up, grab that data, and then talk about that and get down to where they're starving. And if you can get them talking about their starved issue, game over. You'll literally lower all the emotion. They'll feel
Mm.
understood. And then you can finally, when it's your turn to talk, then lift the conversation. And that's where I suggest before you say anything about your position, show them first where you're with them. I totally
Mm.
agree. We can't communicate very well. I agree there are issues that are terrifying. I admit I do get reactive. And
Mhm.
I apologize. I'm so sorry I run you off that way.
Mhm.
And I acknowledge that it's got to be very scary for you to bring up issues when I'm upset like that. And I
Yeah.
sincerely apologize. By the way, they should be reflecting everything you're saying. They should be
Mhm.
reflecting it back to you. And then here's a really cool secret. You then use the word and, not but. You use the
Mm.
word and instead of a but. But the reality is you'll never bring these issues up again anyway. We do need to take it, but you run away like a little girl and then you never bring them up. So when you use the but, you immediately kick them in
Mhm.
the throat and then ignore everything they said. But
Oh,
when
yeah.
you use and, it's pretty cool. I acknowledge what you said. I apologize. I totally do that. And and then you can feel free to say anything you need to say.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm the only one that ever pushes on these issues.
Mhm.
And that makes me feel lonely and insecure. And when I see that you run from me, I feel like I did when I was 12 and my mom had cancer and nobody would talk
Mhm.
to me about it.
Yeah.
I feel alone and I feel insecure and I feel afraid.
Yeah.
So you can say whatever you want, but you say it with an and that
Mhm.
allows the human brain to actually take everything that's been said and combine your new phrase with it. And that's how we handle paradox
Yeah.
of life.
Yeah. So, with these like different techniques for communicating our really big emotions,
Yeah.
um I've noticed personally in my relationship with my husband that he's been very good at listening to me just vent
Yeah.
and cry and be really sad and grieve.
Yeah.
Um and I've noticed that like he doesn't even have to say much. He just listens, and I just feel like there's this closeness that we have that we would never have any other way.
Oh, for sure.
Clinically, I guess, what does that do when we're able to feel heard and to have that safe space to talk to
Yeah.
someone about our deepest emotions
Yeah,
and be
it's
really
huge
vulnerable?
actually. So I believe understanding is probably the greatest human need, right? It's our
Mm,
oxygen. And
yeah.
so one thing everybody could do to make their lives a little easier with communication, especially with opposite sex communication,
Mm-hmm.
is let the male know what you need. Like, honey, I don't need you to solve anything here, but
Mm-hmm.
can you just listen to my feelings? Because I just feel like I need to be heard. You can
Yeah.
even soften it by just saying, it has nothing to do with you. I just want to share with you my feelings about our child
Yeah.
because I just feel like I need to get those out and I don't have anyone that understands them like you. So you don't
Yeah.
need to fix them. Can you just hear them? Because there is an interesting psychology, and there's some great research on this by a woman named Deborah Tannen. That
Mm.
men, I don't know if you believe this or not, but men have completely different goals when we're talking than women do. Like our goals are like could not be more different, and yet we always think they're the same. So one of the things she found, so she's a linguist and she studied conversations between men and women, and she found that women formulate their sentences differently than men do when men talk.
Mm.
She found that when women talk, they have an obvious goal of building rapport. So there's like a bonding function in their conversation. And
Right.
so what she found is the number one goal of females when talking is to bond. The secondary goal, can you guess what the secondary goal is, Madeline?
Uh, I think you taught it in that
Yeah.
evening. I'm trying to remember what you said.
So
To
primary
get
goal is bonding.
uh-huh.
Secondary goal for women is data transfer.
Okay, I was gonna say to get things done. So that's
Yeah,
kind of the same thing,
yeah,
right?
it is
Okay.
get the message
Okay.
across.
Okay.
But what's funny is for women, getting the message across is a secondary goal.
Right.
The
Interesting.
relationship is primary. And that's interesting, right? Because that
Mhm.
makes it so every conversation a woman has, primary goal is a bond. And that
Mhm.
makes sense, right? Like kind of
Mhm.
genetically.
Interesting.
And so women talk to bond primary. Secondary goal is to transfer data. Now that's interesting because the male brain is so different because the male brain usually is more a little more left brain. So data
Hmm.
is really important to us. So our
Mhm.
primary goal when we talk is to transfer data. The reason we talk is to report. So
Hmm.
women report and men report,
Interesting.
right? So when a man comes home from work and let's say the wife's home or whatever, and she's like, how was your day? That invitation to talk is an invitation to bond. But
Mhm.
he hears it as, "Give me a report on your day." So he will give you the report. "My day was fine. My day was fine." And she's always left kinda empty, like, "Okay, so what did you do?" And he's like, "I went to work." And he's like, "'Kay." He just wants more. And
Uh-huh.
he doesn't understand it because he's not measuring bond. If you want to bond with a man, that's
Mhm.
usually done more with action. So come help
Right.
me or let's go have sex or whatever. Like it's a bonding action, right? We don't need to
Uh-huh.
talk about it. Let's just bond. Let's go do it.
Yeah.
So one of the primary goals for a man when talking is to transfer data. Secondary
Mhm.
goal, do you remember what that was?
Oh,
This is
no.
mind blowing. It's to maintain hierarchy
Right,
or
yeah.
status.
Yeah. I remember
And
that.
so this will get into a core problem you might see in couples with children with, medically complex issues
Mhm.
is the fact that if my child is kind of broken,
Mhm.
I don't want to talk about it
Oh,
because it
interesting.
might impact my hierarchy.
Hmm.
Say the wife want to talk about it so we can bond. But he doesn't want to talk about it because it impacts status. It also makes you sad. And every time you cry, a lot of men feel like that lowers their status
Hmm.
because a good man wouldn't have a wife that cries all the time.
Right.
A good man would have a wife that never cried.
And
She'd
they
be
can't
so
fix
happy
it.
with her life. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like
So
unfixable.
isn't that weird? So it makes it so
Mhm.
you keep wanting to bond on the topic, but every time you bring it up, he feels a need to do something and there's
Mhm.
nothing to do. So if you tell him you just want him to listen,
Yeah.
and if you take him off the hook, like it's not about you, you're doing a great job as a dad.
Right.
It's just my feelings of being a mom.
Yeah, and maybe even afterwards saying, "Thank you so much. You did awesome
Yep,
at just listening.
that's it.
You
And that
fixed
that makes
me."
this hierarchy feel good because and remember, like
Yeah.
it's very real. Most men don't just sit there and talk to each other about where they're weak. That's not what they
Mm,
do. Women
right.
will. Women can go like if you had a mammogram, you're going to go talk to all your friends about the mammogram. You're going to be like, "Holy mammogram, that was a nightmare." But if a guy gets his prostate checked, he's not telling anyone.
Right.
Like that's going to lower his hierarchy.
That
So
is
we
so
don't bring.
interesting.
That's why the most curable form of cancer, apparently slowest growing, is like prostate cancer, and yet men don't even bring it up.
That is
Most
so
men aren't
interesting.
even being tested for it. Watch a Super Bowl presentation on television, and they'll always have like one prostate health commercial, and you
Mm.
won't even know it's prostate health because the way they slip the message in there is so subtle that
Right.
no one's even talking about it.
Like, nothing's
So
wrong with this.
isn't that weird? So just know
Yeah.
that there's, and I've done this. I do a lot of work with Alzheimer's Association, with the MS Society, with a lot
Mm.
of with Autism Speaks, a lot of groups, and
Mhm.
men have a little harder time with any of these medical things. If they could just stick with the technical side and just go do it, that'd be great.
Mhm.
But to manage all the emotional side of it, it's too complicated. And then sometimes their hierarchy gets involved because there's
Yeah.
nothing they can do.
Yeah. Yeah, and that involves a lot of vulnerability.
Yeah, totally. And back to emotional unsafe. Yeah.
Right. So I have another question for you too. It's related. A lot of couples, when their child has a diagnosis, they're going through the cycles of grieving at the same time, but in different ways.
Yeah.
How can you remain close during that?
Yeah. That same way we've talked about. What creates closeness? It's universally the same things. It's making
Mm.
sure they feel safe,
Hmm.
making sure that they can trust you, making sure they feel appreciated and respected, validated, encouraged, and dedication. So
Right.
those will transcend every stage of life.
Interesting.
It's we always think it's situational,
Mm-hmm.
but even the stages of grieving aren't always the same stages. And
Right.
you may see a stage that isn't even a stage that the other resonates with because
Mm-hmm.
they may not be angry. They
Right.
may just be numb.
Right.
And they may not be withdrawing because of a stage of grief. They may be withdrawing because anytime in their life they felt vulnerable, they learned to withdraw.
Hmm.
So it might be bigger than even a situational stage of grieving thing, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
eventually in all of our lives, in every marriage, in every parenting of a medically complex child, don't think you have to feel it to do it.
Right.
Sometimes you have to do it in order to feel it. You've all done that.
Yeah.
You've gotten up in the middle of the night, taken care of
Yeah.
the child, fixed everything, cleaned him up, taken care of everything. And then
Mhm.
as you silently are putting that child back to bed, then you feel the most immense, incredible love. But the
Yeah.
love may not have been there when you were interrupted in your
Yeah.
sleep. You have to earn it.
I feel like it almost becomes like you're like, "Oh, this is who I am now."
Yeah.
And so every time after that, it becomes easier and easier because you're
Yeah.
like, "Oh, well, I did it that other time. This is what
Yeah.
I do." So I
But
listen to my
what
spouse or
Now,
whatever
watch
it is.
what's so interesting about that is that
Uh-huh.
because what we do is that's our mind's way of habitualizing it, right?
Right.
Just what I do. I just live a difficult life. This is just what I do.
Yeah.
It's what I am. But one thing you might want to do is watch out for just jumping over that step, and instead recognize that every time you're still making a choice. Because every time you make a
Mm.
choice to climb 10 more miles, you're
Mhm.
that much closer to this higher goal. What you're more
Interesting.
importantly doing is you're earning a love for your child that doesn't exist. I mean, we
Mm.
think the love is just natural because it's your blood and you've done born it. But it's not about just done born in something. You love that child more because you have to work for it.
Right.
And every single time you have to wipe that chin again, every
Mm.
time you wipe that chin, that is you tying another tie to that child, and
Hmm.
another tie to the child, and another tie to the child. So if
I
you
love
want to
that.
know what makes a marriage work, it's
Mhm.
not finding the right person, it's
Mhm.
being the right partner and tying as many ties to your
Ah,
partner as you can.
I
That's why
love that.
you guys don't fall out of love with your children because you're
Right.
working too hard for them. But you could fall out of love with your partner because you're not.
If you're not tying on to them
Right. So
regularly.
one of the keys that we have to do to be a good companion is we have to make time, and we have to make some
Mm.
rules, and we have to
Mhm.
make some rituals. And the rules are don't ever call me that again. Don't ever just make rules up. So after every big disagreement that you guys had, walk away with some rules. Like my
Interesting.
wife and I had to make a rule that we don't have any serious discussions after 10 o'clock at night.
That's a
They
good
never
one.
go well.
Yeah.
They never go well. So if you
Yeah.
want a serious talk, let's do it like on a Saturday morning at about 10.
Right.
We'll have energy, we'll have time. So
Mm.
we made the rule, but we made the rule after years of fighting at night because that was the only time we
Yeah.
had. You
Yeah.
might want to make some rituals too. Rituals are things that we're always going to do. Like one of the
Mhm.
rituals I give is what I call cuddle time. I think
Mhm.
everybody needs 30 minutes of cuddle every single
Mm.
day. And there's
Wow.
two rules attached to it. The rules are no groping. That's for you ladies. So you quit groping us guys. We're not a piece of meat. And and no griping. Don't fill
Oh,
your cuddle time with negative talk. Don't try
interesting.
to fix a problem while you're cuddling with me.
Mm.
If you want to fix a problem, Saturday morning, let's make an appointment. Let's make
Mhm.
an appointment for every Saturday morning to have a 10-minute check-in on our marriage and technically fix anything we need to talk about. It,
Yeah.
it doesn't need to be that every night you get a moment with me that we need to have a big discussion. If you need a little debrief time, a little time to have a clarity conversation, you can say, babe, before we cuddle tonight, can I just have 20 minutes of your time? So and so, the lady down the street said this. It made me so mad, and I just want to get it out of me
Yeah.
and just be held by you tonight.
Yeah.
So
I
make
love
a
that.
ritual, right? And so
Yeah.
once you have a lot of rituals, then the rituals are what are going to keep you in the marriage. It won't matter what the child's doing because
Mhm.
the rituals are going to keep you bonded to each other and create those
Yeah.
ties.
Yeah, I really like that. And I love the ties too.
Yeah. Go just watch the movie The Little Prince that I think is
Oh.
in Prime. But he always served this rose, and he had the
Mm.
favorite rose that was under his a glass case, but the rose was kind of annoying. Oh boy, that rose was demanding. So eventually the prince left his world, came down to our world, and when he got here he saw just millions of rose bushes. gardens just filled with thousands of roses. And at first he thought the roses were just like the rose that was back on his planet,
Hmm.
because they looked a lot alike. But
Mm-hmm.
the longer he was around these roses, he realized they're not at all like that rose, because that's the rose he served. That's the rose
Oh.
he took care of. That's the rose he trimmed and cared for. That's the rose he put under glass and protected.
Mm-hmm.
And so when he went back, he basically testified to her that there is no other rose like you. But the
Mm.
only reason she was the important rose is because you're the rose I made all the ties to.
Yeah. I think it is easier, like you said, to have the rose be our children
Yeah,
because
yeah,
they have all these needs.
that's right.
And it's easier for maybe your spouse to be like that man you were talking about where he's
Yeah,
just doesn't feel
right.
needed, so checks
Yep,
out. But, if we treat our spouse similar to our children, and obviously in different ways, but we
yeah,
give them
right.
the same love and attention,
Yeah,
then,
yeah.
we'll be more
That's
attached.
and I don't know if you remember. I think I taught it to your group, but
Mm.
see all relationships with a gardener metaphor,
Right.
that
Yeah.
everybody you're relating to is a seed. Seeds can just grow anywhere you plant them. You
Mhm.
can improve the likelihood of growth by understanding the seed, nurturing the seed, caring for the seed. And so in your marriage, it's the same way. If you want the marriage
Mhm.
relationship to grow, you've got to plant it, care
Mhm.
for it, nurture it, just like you do your child. And
Yeah.
honestly, there is no doubt, I think, that relationships with children that have medical issues, the parental relationships are more difficult. It's not inherent, but
Mhm.
what's inherent is distraction. And what's
Mm.
inherent is a reprioritization of the child before the relationship.
Right.
So, by the way, same just with anybody that gets cancer, anybody that gets any other disease. A
Mhm.
lot of times the disease takes over, and we don't want anything to get in that space between us.
Right.
So, remember to keep the space between you and your partner clean and pristine. We
Mhm.
might have less time for it, maybe, but you also need to make more time. What it might mean is you have
Mhm.
less time for any other distraction,
Yeah.
right? Like it
Just
might
making
mean
that priority.
you don't have any time for TikTok.
Yeah.
Instead of getting any relaxation from TikTok, you
Mhm.
might need to get your relaxation from cuddle time.
Yeah. We have to wrap up. That's a great way to end too, is that maybe kind of going back to the statistics, maybe even having those, even if they're false, statistics in our head of like, oh, I'm more likely to get divorced. So I'm going to devote way more time into this marriage because I think I have taken my marriage more seriously because I felt threatened.
Yeah,
And so I think,
yeah, that's
that's one way
interesting.
to turn it. But
Yeah,
thank you so much
yeah.
for joining us today and
Thanks for
sharing.
having me.
Yeah, it's been awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
As I mentioned, you can find a link in the show notes to Matt's book, Starved Stuff: Feeding the 7 Basic Needs of Healthy Relationships. You can also find links to his Facebook page, Instagram, and website if you would like to check out his courses and coaching. To learn about new episodes as they are released and my latest musings on medically complex parenting, you are welcome to follow me on Instagram at the_rare_life. Join me next week as I share all about our journey with Kimball and his hearing loss and the huge need for inclusion within the deaf community. It's a great one. Don't miss it. See you then.